Hello and welcome back to the virtual classroom. I'm your host, Dr. Olmsted. And today's topic is part B, or second part of our lecture on America-European contact. Now, as always, take a quick moment, hit pause right now on your screen, and jot down the rest of the lecture outline, paying particular attention to those key terms. Got it? Okay. Now, when we left off, we were discussing the similarities and differences of Native American societies. Remember my big arguments that, number one, Europeans did not discover America in 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That should be pretty apparent now. There were already people living here. They were civilized, they had ideas, religions, they had societies, they had culture. That should be apparent. If not, we will continue. I will drive the point home. The second argument, there was no such thing as an Indian, quote-unquote Indian, in 1492. Again, this should already be clear now because there was so much diversity. Yeah, there's some similarities, but there was diversity in creation stories, in language, in the type of subsistence strategies. There was diversity when it comes to their dwelling spaces. And so we see these very clear distinctions. In other words, Native Americans were as different from the Anasazi tribe, to the Cahokia tribe, to the Mesoamericans, from the Mayas, the Toltecs, the Aztecs. All these groups were as different from each other as the Germans were from the British, as they were from the Spanish, as from the French. They were all, yes, they're all European, fantastic. But they speak different languages, they have different religions, some are Catholic, some are Protestant, some are quote-unquote barbaric, and of course some are other. So where we left off was leading up to the point where, thanks to sedentary societies and growing crops, we have now reached a point where we can have large civilizations. And of course, we have to start right here with the Aztecs at their wonderful, beautiful city of Tenochtitlan, which is just outside modern-day Mexico City. Guys, this is a mega metropolis. Look at this place. There's temples, there's vending stores, you can't quite see it, there's sporting stadiums. This is, again, a recreation. Obviously, it's all been torn down over the years. This was a monumental feat built right near a salt lake. They reclaimed the land to build this. This is a modern architectural marvel. Now, I don't want you to sit here and take my word for it. You'll do a lot in that class. I will say a lot of things. But I want you to get a perspective from someone who saw it firsthand. And that, of course, is the conquistador himself, Hernan Cortez. Hernan Cortez, which of course, I'm sure most of you know the story, he's going to arrive and mostly through smallpox and superior weaponry, i.e. guns and horses, he's going to overthrow pretty quickly the Aztec people and claim it for Spain. Now, there's a whole more elaborate story to that we are not going to get into because this is U.S. history class. But what I want you to understand here is from his perspective. He says the great city of Tenochtitlan is built in the midst of the salt lake. The city itself is as large as Sevilla or Cordoba. These are major cities in Spain. He's comparing to these large Spanish metropolises. He goes on to say it has, quote, many open squares in which markets are continuously held and general business of buying and selling proceed. One square in particular is twice as large as that of Salamanca, surrounded by arcades where daily there are 60,000 folk buying and selling. 60,000 people in this one square buying and selling their goods. Finally, he says, to avoid being wordy, in telling all the wonders of the city, I will simply say that the manner of living among the people is very similar to that in Spain. And considering this is a barbarous nation, cut off from the knowledge of the true God or communication with enlightened notions, i.e., Europe, one may marvel at the orderliness and good government which is everywhere maintained. This is a guy who's going to overthrow the government, overthrow the people, and install themselves as the new people in charge, praising the government, praising this architectural marvel, and how orderly this is all run, comparing it favorably to that of Spain. That's high praise indeed. This is a major metropolis, one of the largest cities in the world at European arrival. In addition, the Mayas to the south, I think this is a different time frame, but you see this wonderful architecture of these temples. Now, the picture on the top right is Tikal. The one on the bottom left, though, is Chichen Itza. It's one of the wonders of the world. That actually is my photograph. I've been there. What you don't see in this photograph, though, is just off to the left. There's a huge ball court, which is a huge stadium to play their sport event known as the ball game. It's kind of like soccer, but you play with your hips rather than your feet. But forgetting that for a moment, we'll come back to some of the other things on the other buildings on the grounds. Chichen Itza itself, the temple you see right there, is a modern architectural model. People still can't figure out how they built this thing. Now remember, the Mayans are smart. They understand the concept of zero before the Europeans do. They don't have the wheel because there was no need for it. There's no pack animals in Mesoamerica, in Central America. So there's no need for a wheel because there's no pack animals to pull a cart. So how did they build this thing? We're still not sure. What they did do, though, was create this temple that, you see that it's kind of square on top, the doors on top? Yeah, that's a great place for sacrifice, for proclaiming the religion. But what you don't see there is if you go straight down that shaft at the very bottom and stand right at the base, inside that square, at the floor level, a priest could speak and it would reverberate across the grounds like an echo chamber. It would amplify their voice to be like the sound of God himself. They create essentially a large microphone or megaphone. If that wasn't enough, you look on the far left of your screen on the steps, you can see there's like little, you can't see it clearly, I know it's kind of a far away image to get a full picture of it, but there's a wavy line going down the steps. That's the tail of a snake. Now, this is one of their gods known as Quetzalcoatl. Now, at the very bottom of the steps, you'll see kind of you can't really see it very well on the picture, but it's the head of the snake known as Quetzalcoatl. It's called the plumed serpent. It's like feathers coming out from his head and his face of a serpent. Okay, it's cool. It's architecturally cool. But this temple was built in such a way that during the summer solstice, on the equinox, that the shadow will cast and it'll make it look like it's slithering all the way down the side of the temple. And the shadow cast by the sun on the equinox will allow this, mind trick, but real. The shadow is like slithering down the side of the temple. This is how good at astronomy the Mayans were, how sophisticated they were. And one of the reasons they had buildings dedicated to it. Here's another building on the grounds of Chichen Itza. Now again, I would not write down all these words here. This particular slide is a screenshot of a slide that I did while in undergrad. Because I was studying in one of my presentations on history of Mexico was on the Mayans and Chichen Itza. But notice the picture on the right though. Now, first of all, you notice the picture on the left is a picture of the actual building we call it the observatory. On the right shows the window access points if you're inside this building, which I have seen before. And by looking at the various windows from standing in the observation room, an astronomer could chart the Medag South, the southernmost position of Venus, and the northernmost position of Venus, along with the sunset equinox. In other words, they're able to chart time, the stars. they're able to create their Mayan calendar, which was actually far more accurate than our modern-day Gregorian calendar. Again, the point is they were sophisticated beyond that of Europeans at that time. And again, understand the concept of zero long before the Europeans did. Okay, you said, well, great, this is Mesoamerica, and we're talking about, this is a U.S. history class, right? Well, guess what? There were also large civilizations in North America, in the United States. The first one we see is the Anasazi tribe. And they have two locations in the American Southwest. They have Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde. Now, these two are very, what you would call planned communities. You see the adobe structures. They are built under the sides of cliffs. Why? It provides protection from the sun. It provides protection from enemies. It gives them a defense area. Yes, can there be some problematic nature of high ground? Yes. But in general, it provides a strategic place for defense and from protection from the sun. You also will notice, if you can see very clearly in the top picture, there's a definitive wall around the city to protect themselves. Chaco Canyon on the bottom left you see. It will reach its peak at around 1100 CE. It is estimated that there were between 600 and 800 apartment-style buildings, no, not houses, apartments, that would house anywhere from 12 to 15,000 people. So 12 to 15,000 people lived in between 600 and 800 apartments. This is modern-day skyscraper living back at 1100 CE. Mesa Verde, also peaking at 1100 CE, held about 7,000 people and about 200 apartments. Now, the descendants of the Anasazi will be the Pueblos that you're probably more familiar with in history. But the reason that even I, as someone who loves history, I never heard about the Anasazi until I got into, well, basically higher levels of undergrad and graduate school. Why? Because by the time the Europeans arrived, we hear about the Incas down in Peru. We hear about the the Mayans with their temples. We hear about the Aztecs. But in modern-day United States, these places were abandoned by the time Europeans arrived to the American Southwest. Now, we think from studying dendrochronology, studying archaeology, that a number of years of overpopulation combined with poor crops and drought will eventually cause these tribal groups to split off into various smaller tribes seeking survival. And so they would split up and separate and become separate tribes again. Similarly, in the middle of the United States, Cahokia, modern-day St. Louis, again, circa 1100 CE, becomes the largest Native American community north of Mexico. This civilization, as you see pictured here, was 350 square miles, somewhere between 20 and 30,000 people who lived there. This community was larger than most any European city at 1100 CE. And because of their central location, they were able to have different subsistence methods. They were able to hunt. They were able to do lots of fishing on the Mississippi River, as well as domesticated agriculture, i.e. corn, maize. The community, however, will collapse, unfortunately, long before the Europeans arrive. Again, we think due to either too much population or with a combination of years of drought. But you can see from the picture, this is what's called a mound society. And this is actually built, you see that central temple in the center of your picture. This is built just by heaping dirt upon itself and heaping up into large piles to create a temple mound. And this will be a religious place. This will be a political space. And of course, there's all the surrounding villages. You see the wall around the central city and all the huts on the outside that will participate in farming. And again, unfortunately, as far as we don't, again, one of these places that you don't hear about usually in U.S. history, but it's important to realize there was these huge civilizations long before Europeans arrived, as in there was already civilization here. Europeans did not bring civilization, they just changed it to their form of civilization. There was a definite hierarchical structure, different social structure. Yes, it was different than European in some ways, i.e. religion. But in very many ways, it was very similar. It was hierarchical, social structure. There was, a priest, there was, leaders, there was rulers, there was, a king of sorts. There was, peasants who farmed the land. And there was tremendous economic trade activity taking place. I'm sure if you ever took world history, you talked about things like the Indian Ocean trade, or of course the Silk Road trade, right? Maybe the Mediterranean Sea trade. But in the Americas, there was also a trade network set up. Now, it took longer. It was not as efficient as the Indian Ocean or Silk Road trade, but it was still nonetheless prevalent. And we know this because we have found pottery shards from the Incas in modern-day St. Louis. So pottery made its way up from the Incas, through the Mayans, through Tenochtitlan, into Cahokia. We have also found fish bones that they're originally from Florida. We have found them not only in Cahokia, but in modern-day Montana. In other words, it probably went through Cahokia, and Cahokia became a central trade hub around, again, circa 1100 CE. So very similar to Europe and Asia. These are these major trade networks. Again, civilization already existed here prior to European contact. But then everything changes in 1492. In 1492, we go from this, where we have all these trade goods going back and forth, to in 1492, Europeans arrive. Again, they don't discover anything. People already lived here. They were not lost. They knew what they were doing. They were happy. Europeans arrive. And so while we note that Europeans were not isolated from each other through these trade networks, they were isolated from the rest of the world, i.e. Europe. And in 1492, when Columbus begins his voyage, he initiates what we call the Columbian Exchange, this unprecedented series of exchanges. It is a series of exchanges of human beings, technology, culture, ideas, religion, material possessions, and of course, food, plants, and animals. Think about this for a minute. Some of these things we take for granted. Things like apples, bananas, coffee. Oh, I love my coffee. These are things that come from Europe to North America. And of course, rice and sugarcane. And of course, ultimately some pack animals like cows, like horses, and of course, pigs and chickens, which are going to wreak havoc on the ecosystem of North America because pigs eat everything. However, what Europeans get in return are things like, well, of course, avocados from Mexico, beans, blueberries, corn, of course, peanuts, pepper. And some of the most interesting one to me is potatoes. Can you imagine the Irish without potatoes? Of course, we didn't have the Irish potato famine either, but that was an import from the New World. Tomatoes. Can you imagine Italy without tomato sauce? It boggles the mind. But yet that was something that came from the New World. In other words, it's not historically part of Italy. But that's the Columbian Exchange in a nutshell. But let's go a little more detail and think about this for a minute in a little more depth. So Columbus's first voyage. 3 ships, approximately 90 men, on ocean for 1 month. They're starving. They're about ready to give up. Their first stop is the island of Hispaniola, modern-day Haiti and Dominican Republic. Now, after his first voyage, in 1492, the King and Queen of Spain quickly send him back the following year with 17 ships and 1,200 men. You went from 3 ships and 90 men, which, again, if Native Americans see them, they're like, aw, poor white people, we'll help you out. The following year, we're now at 17 ships and 1,200 men, no women. Important to note. The difference is, with 3 ships and 90 people, they're coming to scout. They're coming to look. When you come back with 1,200 men, armed with 17 ships, you're no longer coming to explore, you're coming to stay and conquer. And thus, in 1493, with these 17 ships, 1,200 men, the Spanish begin a conquest of civilization, of dress, language, and of course, very important to them, religion. In other words, convert them to Catholicism. You have to picture this for a moment, okay? Some guys dressed in some weird clothes. They're bright, they're wearing foo-foo-y things, they're weird. They step on their land, they take this piece of wood with a kind of a fabric thing on top of it they call a flag. They plant it in the ground and say, "We claim this land for Spain." Oh, what would you be thinking if someone came to your house tonight? Say I came over to your house tonight and said, "Hey, I take this flag, I claim this land, this is now my land, get off." You think that's crazy. Oh, I forgot to tell you. The Indians they're telling this to, remember the Spaniards, Columbus, they're speaking in Spanish. The Native Americans do not know Spanish, so they're speaking in gibberish to Native Americans, planting this weird stick in the ground and saying this land is now ours, and are surprised when the Indians don't say, "Oh, here you go, take it." And so Europe begins this colonization. I have this long quote here, but look at the bottom where I have it kind of boxed in for you. It says, "But if you do not do this, i.e. give in and let us rule over you, and maliciously make delay in it, I certify to you that, with the help of God, we, the Spaniards, will powerfully enter into your country and make war against you in all manners and ways that we can, and subject you to the yoke and obedience of the church and their highness. We shall take you and your wives and your children and make slaves of them, and as such shall sell and dispose of them as the highness may command. We'll take away your goods and shall do to you all the mischief and damage we can, as to vassals who do not obey and who refuse to receive their lord and resist and contradict him." Wow. And again, notice at the top, this is being read aloud in Spanish to the Native Americans. So what are Europeans doing here? They're here to destroy Native American way of life. They're here to make them slaves if they don't just peacefully surrender and give away their land. Wow. It's no wonder that some people don't like Christopher Columbus. This is what he initiates. And of course, the European goals here are to have economic profit, convert those to Christianity and Catholicism, and of course to remake the landscape to make it more familiar. In other words, God, glory, and gold, 3 G's of colonization. However, the Spanish also bring one more thing. They bring new germs and diseases with them to this new world that Indians had never been exposed to. It had devastating consequences to Native Americans that would wipe out entire Indian populations, producing what we call virgin soil epidemics. Now, virgin soil epidemics are these epidemics that devastate and will wipe out Indian populations, entire communities, and include things like smallpox, typhoid, cholera, tuberculosis, flu, malaria, chickenpox, polio, yellow fever, Black Death, and of course, measles. Notice most of these things we now have vaccines for. These are all things back in the 1500s that Indians had never dealt with before. And therefore, whenever a new disease goes through a population, it can have devastating impacts. Coronavirus. Interesting of note, the only major disease to originate in the Western Hemisphere that made its way back to Europe in any large number was syphilis. Now, I don't know if you guys know what syphilis is or not, but it is an STD. which means the only way that European men obtained it or contracted it was because they were messing around, fooling around, usually raping Native American women. Remember I said 1,200 men arrived with Columbus? All men, soldiers? Yep. After months at sea, they found Native American women very appealing and began to rape them in most instances. Some would intermarry, yes. But in return, the men would contract syphilis and take it back to their families back in Europe, thus spreading syphilis across Europe in return. Now, by far, of course, I'm sure you all know this, the most devastating of these virgin soil epidemics was, of course, smallpox, which will have a higher than 90% mortality rate among Native Americans. But of course, rather than looking at this from a medical or scientific perspective, some that really did not do at this point, some still don't do it, they instead look at it from a spiritual perspective. Now, Native Americans, of course, look at it from shamans, but even the Europeans, supposedly enlightened Europeans, see this as a spiritual punishment. These epidemic diseases like smallpox are seen as a spiritual punishment. In other words, the Spanish interpretation is, because they're not Catholic, God is punishing them. Indian interpretation is, because they weren't following the gods, or because the Spanish God was stronger, we are now suffering. Which helped justify European intrudence, since they could say, well, we must be doing the right thing because we're living and we ain't dying. Yeah, it's a harsh reality, but that's the way they thought. Because they were living and not dying, it must be God's will. And of course, all this encompasses what we call the Columbian Exchange. It also includes one more thing. And that goes back to my original statement at the beginning of the very part A of this lecture. The term Indian. I said there's no such thing as an Indian in 1492. And there wasn't. And we discussed why. There were very diverse groups of tribes. The term Indian, though, becomes a product of Columbus not being aware that he was in a world unknown to Europeans. Remember, his first goal was to find the West Indies, spice trade, Indian Ocean. So he has no idea who he's coming. He doesn't know where he's at. He calls them all Indians. But he conceived of Indians as a monolithic group. And the reason it wasn't necessarily derisive, it was that he thought of them all as being the same because they were savages. Remember, savage to them meant not Christian. Remember, savage at its most basic form just means not Christian, or in this case, Catholic. And so the use of the word Indian to describe the diverse indigenous peoples of America was a product of the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th century, as Native Americans are dispossessed and increasingly defined as racially different, racially inferior. Up to this point, though, Indians do not see themselves this way. They still see themselves as distinct, as having individual histories. It is not until really the 18th century, late 17th century, mainly 18th century, when Indians began to see themselves as Indian. This happens because they begin to see themselves as having a common history in the face of European onslaught. That is, as Indians lost more land and were increasingly subjected to European rule, those former cultural differences like language or creation story, or even animosity between tribes, seem less and less important than the common experience of being colonized by Europeans. It is not until then when Indian as a name, as a term, really begins to mean something. So the question then we have for the next series of lectures is, what happens next As more and more Europeans arrive, how do Native Americans handle that? And so we will stop here today. We will pick up with the founding of the first English colony next time. But until then, take care and bye-bye.